To go, you can take the truth with you by taking the Blaze with you. Find out all the ways at theblaze.com.
An update on national security. The Blaze Radio's Kay Long with the story.
National Security Advisor Susan Rice claiming much changing in the past few years on the national security horizon.
2015 is a whole new ballgame. Much has changed in the last 5 years. As a nation, we're stronger than we have been in a very long time.
Rice's comments following release of a new national security strategy. The strategy report highlighting growing threats from terrorism, cyber attacks, and aggression by Russia. It highlights growing instability and turmoil in the Middle East and says the U.S. must continue aggressive counterterrorism efforts with allies in the region.
Won't you look all around you where there are nothing but the blue sky? Oh, just look straight ahead. Well, there's nothing but a bluer sky. To a guy like me, you know. I can see clearly now. Yes, I can. Hey, there's still the bad feelings have all disappeared. Maybe this is the rainbow that I've been waiting for. Well, I know it'll be all right. It's a bright, sunshiny day.
High above the Parisi Palace at 2919 East Broadway, this is the Jake Feinberg Show, and it is a bright, sunshiny day out there today in the old Pueblo. We thank you for being part of the program today. My show revolves around the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage, and the ongoing story of real music made by real artists. To be an impresario takes guts. You're a fan, sometimes a rabid fan, and you need to find a way to turn a profit. In today's touring circuit, it's Tom Waits, warmed over, covered in corporate sponsors, in a sea of digital music that has been forced into people's ears over the last 2 decades. My guest today was a chance taker before full interconnection. He came up when college universities had resources to fund the arts, and he was one of the brainchilds of the modern touring circuit. My guest is a passionate music lover. He leans rock and rolls with reggae and soul to soothe the inner angst of relationships young and old. Bruce Springsteen, Jim Mussina, Frank Zappa, Leon Russell, Willie Nelson, John McLaughlin, and Kenny Gradney. Some were Jersey natives, and others were barnstorming the country when hotbeds of regional radio and regional music created an elasticity within people's ears. Broader palates in Lawerenceville and Kean College and Caldwell College. My guest saw opportunity and interfaith and wisdom at a young age and invested in the Capitol Theatre in Passaic, New Jersey, a smut house by day in the bucolic city, the same as the Tower Theatre in Upper Darby and the Stanley Theatre in Pittsburgh and the old Uptown Theatre in Chicago. These vaudeville houses had a warm, cozy feel where mushroom-addled audiences listened to my guest introduce Jorma Kaukonen, Little Feat, Hot Tuna, the Burrito Brothers, Vassar Clemens, Billy Cobham, and Steve Miller. In the early 80s, my guest became the go-to impresario of the newly christened Brendan Byrne Arena, where huge bombs from Phil Lesh tested the structural integrity of the building that had great acoustics prior and after MIDI technology. One of another kind, John Scher, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Okay, first question for you, my man. When you were just getting your sea legs, early impresario, can you talk about a time when things were falling apart all around you and you had to use your your talents came to the forefront before you truly trusted your gut and you were able to keep the show together and it did not fall apart?
Well, it was a different era. When I started in the early 70s, I was still in college when I started, and it was a different era, and it was a community that doesn't exist anymore. The music community was tied together by promoters, producers, musicians, agents, managers, all to a large degree, wanting to accomplish the same thing, which is, to let the music play and to have people enjoy it and be able to meet up at shows and find new friends and reacquaint themselves with old friends. So, it was almost always by my gut. My first experience with concerts was my parents, who absolutely did not understand a thing about rock and roll and thought it was a fad.
Right.
But because I had an older brother, and because they sort of felt that we should be exposed to what was going on, we got brought in the 50s, and I was a little kid, into the very early 60s, out to Brooklyn, to the old Brooklyn Paramount Theater, where Murray the K and legendary Alan Freed used to put on sort of rock and roll reviews. There'd be, 6, 8 different acts, all of whom, just played a few songs. But I sort of got fascinated by the process, even when I was in single digits. That sort of continued on through college, and I went to Long Island University in Brooklyn, and was able to get on the concert committee, and put together my first show, and really loved the process. Had lots of my friends doing various different things, but I had grown up in New Jersey, and at the time when the Fillmore East was open in New York, Bill Graham's Fillmore East, he would have an exclusivity clause that prohibited acts that were playing the Fillmore from playing within like 100-mile range. Right. So there were very few shows in New Jersey itself, or in northern and central New Jersey. But in 1971, Bill closed the Fillmore East. And it gave me an opportunity and other promoters an opportunity to sort of stake out their own piece of the world. And the Capitol opened in December of 71. I'd done, a couple dozen shows before that in various college gyms and theaters. But the Capitol opened in 71 and never looked back until 88 when it closed.
John, I want to ask you, can you? This is so integral to my appetite. Can you talk about the colleges? I know your reach before the Passaic was. Which colleges did you impresario at before you took over full time at the Capitol?
Well, we did an occasional show at Stony Brook in Long Island, yeah, and at CW Post in Long Island, at Rutgers University in New Jersey, at what is now Kean College, William Patterson College, Bloomfield College, Caldwell College, all in New Jersey. But I also spread out, and I realized that, I had friends all over the country in college. And, I sort of encouraged them one by one to get on their concert committees and get me in to be able to buy the talent for them. So we did shows, as far-flung as University of Missouri and Columbia, Missouri, Miami University down in Florida, Penn State, University of Massachusetts. I did a lot of shows during those days. Some of the SUNY schools in upstate New York. That's really where I sort of cut my teeth.
I got a letter from a fellow Scataconian, a guy named Bert Holman. Does that name ring a bell to you?
Sure does.
So
Bert's a good friend.
Yeah, Bert's coming on my program at the end of the month to talk about his uncle and Scatico, and obviously his life and music. But I said, I emailed him this week. I said, did you ever hang out with John? And he said, I worked for John for 13 years, and he allowed me to learn he allowed me to learn on the job from him. And he goes, ask him about the first show he booked for his prom. So you want to share that on radio?
I'm surprised he didn't tell you to ask me about the first show that I booked with Bert when he was in college.
Well, let's do that one. I think because I know the prom. I think the prom has been vetted. I think I read about it, but if you have another story, I'd love to hear it.
I'll tell you both.
Okay.
When I was a junior in high school, in the school I went to, which is Mountain High in West Orange, New Jersey, the junior prom was put on by the junior class, but the seniors were allowed to come for free. And a very good friend of mine now, who is one of the most renowned oncologists in the world today, Dr. William Haidt, Billy to me. He's the head of oncology for Johnson & Johnson now. He was a year older than me, and he was the president of the student body. And he went to me and said, we want to have the best prom ever. We want something to be different than, your normal old bar mitzvah wedding band playing. So, I'm making you the prom chairman, and, go do something. And so I booked I booked the Chiffons, who were early 60s acts that had, a few hits. And I went through the whole process of booking him, and that's really the first time I ever negotiated a deal with an agent. And it was all set. Everybody was very happy that this was happening, and all the tickets got sold. And I stood there in my rented tuxedo, from whatever time I arrived to the end of it, and waiting, and the Chiffons never showed up. It was the only time in my career to this day that I had an act simply not show up. But we had the bar mitzvah wedding band, and, it came off, and I came to learn sometime after that they had stopped on the way to the prom at a local bar to have a few drinks, and ended up never leaving the bar. So, trial by fire, I met Bert when he became the concert chairman at American University. And Bert was clever enough to somehow get a huge budget, and I mean huge budget, out of American University administration to put on concerts, to put on big concerts. If I remember correctly, I think we had Leon Russell, I think we had Chicago, but by that point, I had started to have a very good relationship with the Grateful Dead. Mm-hmm. So I got, they had the budget, and we booked the Grateful Dead to play on the sort of athletic field at American University, free concert. The show went up, and there was a huge throng of people. This is when the Dead were still at that point in their career playing theaters mostly. They hadn't graduated to playing arenas yet. But it was for free, and it was in Washington, where there's, a whole bunch of colleges and universities in addition to American. So, I don't know what number of kids were there, but as far as the eye could see on this field, could see. But they're right, maybe 30 or 40 yards away from the stage. American had a radio station, as many universities and colleges do, and their tower was right there. And when the band started to, get ready to go and get on stage, Jerry Garcia plugged in his amp, and loud and clear through his amp came the college radio station.
Man.
And it sort of freaked everybody out they sort of, made a sort of announcement, we've got some technical difficulties. And after about a half an hour, Ramrod, who is, the most key Grateful Dead roadie, figured out what to do and how to stop the radio station from coming through Jerry's amp. And the show went on.
John, it's such an honor to be talking to John Scher today. I was born in 1978, and I have a real love for, I guess, just the way that, looking back on it, we don't have to go into a real macro question, but things seemed in the 70s with freeform radio, prior to real, FM radio coming into play, you had very good, everything was in sync. You had a lot of live venues, you had a lot of open radio, and you ultimately had musicians who were really trying to create authentic music to themselves. And I was just hoping you could take some time to talk about, Leave On. We heard from Rick Danko on the opening of the show. That was from December of 77. And the list goes on and on and on. Why were these guys so fiercely individualistic players in your mind?
Well, look, it was a very collaborative era, number one. And as I said in the beginning, all of the various people in the industry, worked collaboratively. I promoted a lot of shows with the band and became very friendly with them. The sense, the sense of, there was something happening, it's sort of hard for this generation to understand because they've lived through, war for, the last 10, 15 years. But at the time, in the 70s, the Vietnam War was still, raging, and it was much more of a traditional war than the kinds that are being fought these days. There are a lot of troops on the ground and a lot of hand-to-hand combat. My generation, to a large degree, could never understand why the U.S. government got us into this war so many thousands miles away, no real direct U.S. interests other than trying to stop communism. And of course we had what that generation really thought of a wicked president in Richard Nixon, a guy who was incredibly conservative, appeared to have, all kinds of ultra-conservative views, sort of despised the hippies, and the recourse to that for this generation were the talented musicians who, could write, starting with Bob Dylan, and going certainly to Robbie Robinson and the band, and Garcia and Hunter and Weir and Barlow and so on and so forth. They kept the chronicles of the era and spoke to the heart and spoke to a generation, with the generation older than us just not having a clue.
Right.
Just not having a clue. That was the generation above us was a World War II or the Korean War generation, and to those people it was patriotic. If America went to war, you signed up and you went. This was a war that hundreds of thousands of young people were forced via the draft into the war. So there was an enormous schism between the two generations, and as I said, Richard Nixon only exasperated it. I think that we were lucky as a generation, we were lucky as a nation to have that era of songwriters. And there's 100 more that I haven't named.
Right.
To sort of speak their mind and really speak our mind as a generation. I think as the music industry got more and more commercialized and more conservative over the next, say, 20 years, that got stifled. That kind of protest, that kind of music, slowly but surely got stifled. Stations, started with playlists. It wasn't freeform radio anymore, and the playlists got tighter and tighter. Then when the Federal Communications Act got changed, and you could have huge corporate entities owning, hundreds, if not thousands, of radio stations, to where we are now, where there's probably 4 major companies that control the huge majority of all the radio stations. It's the same programming from one station to the next. There's no real, there's no real freedom by the DJs to play music, and there still are great songwriters out there that are writing about the times, but they have a very difficult time getting on the radio. Times they have changed.
I'm marinating with John Scher. My father, who happens to be in the studio today, was nodding his head in agreement with you with your analysis of the World War II generation. It must have, in today's real-time interconnected media, when you can see even the most covert military operations unfold before your very eyes, I can't even imagine what it must have been like for you guys to be like, why are we even engaged in that Vietnam War? But I don't want to get too distracted here. John, you were a problem solver. I've interviewed over 400 musicians, and I wanted to, we normally play a game called Name That Tune, but this one will be Name That Person, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay?
Okay.
He was originally the guitar player in Earth, Wind & Fire. He played with Hubert Laws and Ronnie Laws.
Oh my God! Those cats they came from Houston.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Roland Batista and I grew up together.
Oh,
now
this is sick.
Alfonso Johnson was Roland's roommate in the old days.
Oh my!
He calls me up, Kenny. I got. Would you like to play with Bob Weir in Bobby's band with Billy Cobb? I said, sure. Because if I got this gig in Santana, I said, oh, Santana needs a bass player? He goes, hey, man, that's my gig. I said, I'm just kidding because I want to play with Billy Cobb anyway. Well, Bobby Cochran wanted me to audition for him. And I'm like, isn't this Bob Weir's band? He goes, well, I want to see if you can play with Billy Cobham. I said, do you play with Billy Cobham? He goes, well, yeah. I said, well, I play with Richie Hayward.
Yeah, right.
Okay?
Yeah, right.
And he wanted me to audition. I said, no, thanks. And I hung up the phone. Well, John Scher calls me up 2 minutes later. Kenny, what's going on? I said, who's this Bobby Cochran now? Bobby Cochran turned out to be a great guy. It's Eddie Cochran's name. I said, this guy wants me to audition. He goes, Kenny, you got the gig. Don't worry about it. Learn the songs.
Kenny, don't worry about it. Learn the songs. Who was it? Who was that, but man?
Kenny Gradney.
You better believe. Go ahead.
Now, then became the bass player in Little Feat, and our company co-manages Little Feat.
Really? No, because he was originally. I'm not. Did you ever do anything with Delaney and Bonnie? When he was with them way back when?
Well, I played. It was very early. It was very early in my career when Delaney and Bonnie existed. I think I played promoted 1 or 2 shows with them, but I probably wasn't at the time even aware of the personnel. It's interesting you bring up Delaney and Bonnie because They were one of the most amazing live acts I've ever seen in my life. Never really to be, replicated by anybody until the last 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure how familiar you or your listeners are with the Tedeschi Trucks Band.
Sure.
But, this is reincarnated Delaney and Bonnie and Friends with a guitar player just as great as Eric Clapton and a singer, just as great or greater than Bonnie Bramlett. They're an extraordinary. I think they're the greatest American rock and roll band on the scene right now from a pure playing point of view. But it goes back to what we talked about a couple of minutes ago. There's not really a place for on radio in America, on mainstream radio, for them. But if you haven't seen them, you have a chance to. They are the goods.
I just like more getting inside John Scher's head. I mean, Gradney is such a legendary character, and there he is, hemming and hawing. And I've interviewed Cochran. I've done 2 interviews with Billy Cobham. I've interviewed Bobby Weir. I found Dave Garland in Vegas. I found that whole band. And I know exactly the micromanager that Bobby Cochran was. I know how absolutely artistically eccentric Bob Weir was. And I just really, for me, it's like, how many times did you just have to say 4 words to people to get them to get their act together? Kenny, you got the gig. Learn the tunes. How many times did you have to do that?
Well, look, it was with a different hat on. I managed, I managed or co-managed those bands. In Billy's case, Billy was also a member of Jack Bruce and Friends.
That's right.
That I managed, which was an amazing, amazing band. Actually somebody just sent me a picture of us all together. So each one of those guys that you named were really sweethearts.
Mm-hmm.
They were monster players. Whenever there's a monster player, probably in anything, whether it be music, whether it be sports, whether, it be science, with that enormous talent and great intellect, people are a little standoffish. But these guys were all real sweethearts, to tell you the truth, and remain so. It wasn't hard, and Bobby, who you're right, has very eclectic taste.
Right.
Sometimes I used to have to say to Bobby, Bob, do you know your Bob Weir? Do you understand, the songs that you have written and played?
Yeah.
So, Bobby was always, and I think still is always, sort of searching for something a little different, and a little more eclectic out there. But, he's a sweetheart of a guy, and when he's the band leader, things like tempo are very important to Bob. But, all those bands got along great together. And there was never, it was really, it was an outgrowth of my relationship with the Dead.
Right.
The Grateful Dead, when I started working with them in the mid '70s, there was never really a traditional manager. There were various guys that were the managers, but once things clicked between me and the band as a promoter, they came to this sort of realization that they just didn't want to deal with the outside world. They didn't want to deal with the outside business world, for sure. So they left a lot of it to me. I was never their manager, but I was sort of their representative. So I made some of their record deals, and I booked their tours, and it got with Bob. It got a little closer to to real personal management. The only way you can have a healthy relationship when you're in a management position is to be able to speak the truth. Now, the truth sometimes turns out to, work out to be a homogeneous group decision.
That's right.
Sometimes telling the truth, musicians don't want to hear about it, and the relationship falls apart. But every one of those guys, from Bobby to Kenny to Billy, they're all good guys, and I'm in touch a little bit, more than a little bit with some, and every once in a while with some other ones.
I just, I want to tell you, man, for somebody who just is obsessed with the early 80s Jerry Garcia band, Bob Weir band, and the Grateful Dead, were you, the venues you were booking were priceless. Priceless. I mean, you had them, were you responsible for Jerry Garcia band tours in the early 80s?
Yes.
Mazel tov, my friend. Mazel tov to you. Okay, this is legacy. This is, we're talking like, I think everything west of the Mississippi. It was the Uptown Theatre in Chicago, and then the Agora Theatre in Cleveland, and then Providence, and then the in Boston Music Hall, and then Flynn Theatre in Burlington, and then Worcester, and then Kean. These and a lot of this stuff's been released digitally too. It's just you really seize the moment. Last night I promoted. I actually produced a concert with two amazing jazz bass players, Glenn Moore from the band Oregon. Did you ever work with Oregon at all?
Don't think so, but I know him pretty well.
Okay, so I promoted the show, and I really had to do exactly what you said. I had to tell the truth that I wanted another musician to come in and play because I knew it would enhance the sound of the music. And here I'm talking to David Friesen and Glenn Moore, two titans. And Glenn looked at me, he said, we don't play with other people. I said, well, as an impresario, I was pushing it. I said, I want you to play with Amochip because I know he'll expand the music. To me, you took advantage of the time that you were in. And I just, was it always that fluid for you? It just seemed, it was the most magical time to be in your position, and you took full advantage of it. It just seemed the venues all these venues are gone now. Go ahead.
They're not all gone, but some of them are gone. Look, you know what? I loved what I was doing. I really, grew into the business head that, that the people I represented, or even the people just I promoted, sort of needed to move ahead successfully. Because, listen, they have to eat, they have families, they have mortgages just like everybody else. The venues, at the time, especially with Jerry and Bobby and and Jack Bruce and friends, and any number of other people I managed and or promoted, the venues were just natural.
I know.
It was it wasn't really I can't take a lot of credit for taking these bands and putting them in these right places. You'll remember the Calderon out in Long Island.
Sure.
Was one of those places for a number of years. At the time, things have changed only a little bit in all these years. The great concert halls, of America, the Carnegie halls and the Avery Fisher halls and, the Academy of Music in Philadelphia and the Kennedy Center in Washington, they were available, but they didn't care too much for rock and roll,
Right.
And there was no real way to at the time to control the audiences from smoking pot, and these were places that, God forbid you smoked anything,
right,
in them. So, places, like my Capitol Theater and any number of these other places, became, you poured, your profits back into it to make sure they all sounded good and it was all comfortable for the acts, and they became, natural places on a circuit. It's a bit different now. It wasn't really as hard, it wasn't as genius as you make it out to be, or at least it wasn't to me. It was very natural. When the Dead got very big, and before they took the year off,
74.
they made the Grateful Dead movie. Still to this day, one of the greatest rock and roll movies ever. And they took off about a year. Jerry and Bobby, did do some touring on their own during that time. I got very involved with Jerry and the film, and a guy named Richard Loren, who actually just put a book out, which is a pretty interesting book, who was the agent and
I know him very well.
manager,
Absolutely.
Of the Dead for a certain period of time. But I got involved, Jerry got me involved in the film and the distribution and the marketing of the film. But, after that came out and they had taken a year off, they're ready to go back to work, but they really didn't know how they could play to control what was going on. They realized how hugely popular they were, and when they were, playing a single night in a, say a 3,000 or 4,000 seat theater, the demand was overwhelming. So there was always tension with the local police. There was always tension, with the local communities because there were, so many kids outside
yeah, right.
of the venues. So they and this was really the time that I really got involved in a full-fledged, sort of full-time way. I talked to them and they said, we'd like you to come out and have a meeting with us. Now, at this point, they're not working, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Bob's house, which, by the way, was the ultimate bachelor pad of all time.
Was it Mill Valley? Was it Mill Valley?
Ultimate bachelor pad. And we all sat down. I remember sitting on the floor for hours talking about what to do. They had the tour, the last tour they had done was with the Wall of Sound, which simply didn't work. It was a very interesting idea, and they sort of mixed it themselves on stage, but with all the speakers behind them, the amount of volume it had to put out to get people in bigger places just overwhelmed the guys on stage. So they gave that plan up, took the year off, put the film out, and then we sat down in Marin and talked about how they could get back on the road without it being chaotic. And this sounds like an awfully simple solution, but at the time people weren't doing it. We just went and booked multiple days in the same theaters really that they loved playing. But instead of doing one night, we played 3 nights or 4 nights or 5 nights. And that worked. It met the demand at the time, but they kept getting more and more and more popular. So after that, it moved into arenas at a time when there were a lot of new arenas being built that accommodated music concerts better than the older ones did. I mean, you brought up earlier the Meadowlands Arena. It was built with every inch of the interior with acoustic paneling because they knew there'd be a lot of concerts. Where, say, the old Boston Garden or the old Madison Square Garden, there'd never been a concert ever in the old Madison Square Garden until it moved to its current location. So when people went and tried to play some of these older venues, they sounded terrible. So the Dead sound guys who are always absolutely tops.
Right.
Sort of devised plans for sort of early quad systems. We even got to the point where we put some speakers up in the lobby areas, in the vestibule, so if people were out there dancing, they could hear the music. So little by little, the Grateful Dead were always innovative, and it was always about the fans. The ticket price was, always on the lower end of what arena acts were getting, and it was always about the fan experience. So, that was my upbringing in the business. So that sort of kind of upbringing, I tended to bring to all the other things I did.
Well, just to be clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe John Scher also got Garcia and Kean into Avery Fisher Hall in '84. Was that you that got them in there? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This man claims he's not a genius, but I beg to differ. We're gonna go with you segued beautifully. We're gonna play a tune from John Scher production, and then we'll come back and break it down. Okay?
Okay, sure.
All right, Mr. Scher, what do you got for us, brother? What do you think that is?
Don, please. I have no clue. Absolutely none.
That was the Grateful Dead from April 17th, 1983. From my historical records, it was the second concert ever at the Meadowlands. But Bruce, it was in '81. This was Stephen Stills came on with them both nights. I assume this must have been a John Scher production.
Yep.
Did you the first show was Springsteen in '81? Is that right?
Yes.
And then in '82, did you do any promotion? Was the Dead the second band to be in the Meadowlands after Springsteen?
Oh no. I mean, the Meadowlands was the hottest arena in the country at that time. So, there were more shows, in 81 and on through.
Can you talk, for some reason, it seems to me, I went to the Meadowlands later on, the late 80s, 90s, to see sporting events. I found it to be cavernous. Did it change over time? You said it was built with acoustic paneling. When I listened to that sound, that's an audience recording. Even if I was sober in the crowd, I would have walked out completely enlightened. Did the acoustics change over time? It just seems so snug in there.
Well, look, it was built. There weren't any architects out there that were building, arenas that would sound like, concert halls. But this was the first arena in America. Now, many, many, many have been built that took into account that, the sound quality couldn't be, bouncing around and echoing, like it would at a ball game. At the end of the day, when not only the Grateful Dead, but all the bigger acts at the times moved into playing primarily arenas, there were some of the older arenas that sounded terrible, and there were some, more and more newer arenas that sounded better. None of them sounded as good as, playing at a concert hall, because they were, 10 times the size.
Mm-hmm.
It changed, the 80s, at the end of the 80s, it's why the Capitol closed in 88 at the time. There were very, very few acts that were still playing theaters. They were all either trying to play arenas or play second build on arena shows. And the Dead adapted. And not only did the Dead adapt, but as I said before, they tried incredibly hard to better themselves from a sound point of view all of the time. Much more so than any other act that I can think of other than Pink Floyd, who also worked very hard at it.
We're talking to John Scher here. I wanted to ask you, John, if you could talk a little bit about it's been very well documented about you bailing Jerry out of jail you said something. You said he was one of the most profoundly brilliant, genius people that you ever met, and I was hoping you could expound as to why, and if in fact the amount of the acid tests and the LSD helped them, all of the band, just have a wide perspective. I just would love you to expound on the genius of all those guys.
Well, look, the whole acid tests, were before my time. They were in the 60s. Not before my time alive, but my time in working with them. And, believe it or not, I first started promoting a couple of shows with them in the early 70s, and then by the mid-70s, was really booking them, in the whole world except for the West Coast. That Bill Graham still did. The drugs just weren't as prevalent as the myth has it. I'm not saying that they were choir boys; they certainly weren't. But the drugs just weren't all that prevalent. Certainly during long periods of time, there were periods of time when they were. I found Jerry to be incredibly well read. He very smart, had a very interesting take on politics, on things going on around the world, on culture. As people came to know later, he was, a great painter. And if you got to know him well, as I did, and especially, from the mid-70s till, certainly the early 90s, when you had time alone or in a small group, he was just the smartest guy in the room. It's just that simple. He didn't flaunt it. I doubt he ever would have thought of himself that way. But, you could have incredibly interesting conversations with Jerry about almost anything. I'll tell you one a quick story. At one point they were, got so successful they could fly private, which one of the things that does is it makes it much easier on their bodies, but it also makes it much easier to book a tour when you don't have to go through airports and all that. And I was up until maybe the first time I got on a plane with them, I was very scared of heights. I was not a good flyer.
Mm-hmm.
I had flown commercially, a lot, but I was a white knuckle flyer. And the first time we got on a private jet, I was shook, man. I was not I was not prepared to do this. And Jerry sort of saw it and sensed it and said, "Hey, come sit next to me." And I sat next to him, and as we were getting ready to take off, and indeed did take off, Jerry spent about 15 or 20 minutes explaining to me the way a jet engine works.
Unbelievable.
And how safe it is, and how little can go wrong. And that was just a casual conversation. He was intuitive enough to know that I was scared shitless. He explained it in very simple terms. From then on, I've never had any problem flying.
Yeah, Kemper. David Kemper, his drummer, David Kemper, said that Jerry knew everything about everything. I mean, you could, and so you're relaying that. I mean, you said his point of view was pretty different. There was one specific detail April 10th, 1982, he did a solo acoustic performance at the Capitol. And he was not happy, was he? I would love to hear that conversation.
He was pissed off at me big time. I talked him into doing this short tour of solo acoustic just to mix it up a little bit.
Sure.
And of course, I'd seen him, backstage or in the rehearsal studio or whatever, picking at an acoustic guitar and doing stuff, and he's great. He was a great, he was an amazing musician. I mean, he was a great acoustic guitar player. He was obviously a great electric player. When he worked at it, he was an amazing pedal steel guitarist, and in the New Riders. So I said, look, this will be a really cool idea. Your fans will get to see these songs as they envision you created them. So he said, okay, I'll give it a try. And the first show was at the Capitol, and he went out there, and it just didn't work for him. I mean, it just being, his greatest strength as he had, as much charisma as he had, as great of a player as he had, it did not work being up there all alone. He took a break after maybe just 20 minutes, and ripped me a new one.
Wow.
All right. And said, get John Kean here by tomorrow. So
Kean was at the Beacon the next day.
We put him on on a red eye, and sure enough, John Kean was there the next day with a stand-up bass, and the rest of that went well. He just, I wouldn't call it a crutch. He just, didn't like, being there by himself. It's like, I'm a guy who likes team sports a lot. I've never been a golfer, for example, because, I don't like the loneliness of it all, having any teammates to be able to help you out. So, that's a true story. That's a true story. And then, we also did this one tour of Olden and Away, which was, an extraordinary experience. With him experimenting with some great bluegrass players, and John Kean.
Well, I mean, I've documented that tour with. I did a concert for Peter Rowan last year here, and I've interviewed David Grisman, and of course, just having Vassar there. That whole story is so great, John. There are like a lot of other things I would love to talk to you about, and I'm just hoping that you'd consider coming on to do part 2 in the near future, because we got to wrap things up here.
Sure, let's talk.
All right, man. Hey, listen, thank you so much, man. Have a beautiful weekend, and thank you for bringing knowledge and passion to the earth.
And I'd be very remiss if I didn't just mention the Rex Foundation. It's a charitable organization that the band founded, still exists today. Bobby and Mickey, Jerry's daughters, Mountain Girl, Bill Walton are all still on the board. We do great things. So it'd be great if your audience could look up the Rex Foundation and see if they could help out.
John, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much, man.
Yep.
Have a good day.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Yep,
We'll be right back.
You know, a gig